Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, everybody. And this is something that perhaps should give motivation to our sisters who are minorities in this area, who are working hard to bring justice, to bring the principles of Islam back to Muslims. This is not about the principles of anything else or any other philosophy or culture. It is the principles of Islam back to Muslims. Simple as that. The model of the Prophet ﷺ is well known, but we are so far from that model. And I think the contribution that I could make to this discussion is why are we so far from the model of the Prophet ﷺ, the model in which it was a place for Arabs and Africans and Romans and Persians. It was a place for men and women and children. It was a place for everybody who wants to be in the mosque, including the Christians from Najran who came and stayed the whole day in the mosque and prayed in the mosque, the Jews of Medina who always frequent the mosque, and so forth. You read about an open place that's a community center in which they had their wedding parties and they had their dancing in the days of Eid, and all of these are from the authentic collections and something that anybody who studies Sharia would memorize. But why? Why is there a gap? From the scholarly perspective, there are two issues that I think we need to face in scholarship, as well as facing many other issues in society and so on. But I think these two issues are key, and facing them would help the cause, inshallah. The issue of misinterpretation and the problem of misnarrations. And it's not only misinterpretations, but there are misnarrations too. And that is very important because the misnarrations are about narrations that are in some authentic collections that are misnarrations. Are there any misnarrations in the authentic collections? Yes, there are. Ibn Hajar, the main commentator on the Bukhari, who is the collection number one in the Hadith, the most authentic collection in Hadith, Ibn Hajar differed with Bukhari over the authenticity of dozens of people, and therefore the authenticity of dozens of Hadith. And he is the first and foremost commentator on that collection. So anybody who has a degree of scholarship in Islam, in the Sharia, would know that not everything in Bukhari is correct. And it doesn't mean that Bukhari was a bad man, or I received some interesting comments. It's not black and white. The Bukhari was a great imam in our time, and he put a lot of effort to collect as many hadiths that he can collect, that the Prophet said, ﷺ, and out of 400,000 that he collected, he chose 10,000 to put in that book that he thought he could trust their narrators. But the narrators, according to his criteria, are not all correct, are not all authentic, even according to his own criteria. But that's quite technical. I'm just saying that there are misnarrations that bring women, that put women in a position that is contrary to Islam, contrary to what Prophet ﷺ taught us. Mentioning leadership that our sister mentioned, there is a hadith in which people who appoint a woman leader will never be successful. ما أفلح قوم ولوا أمرهم امرأة. And that hadith, yes, found its way into some authentic collections. But this hadith is a misnarration. As simple as that. The companion who narrated the hadith was a companion who was accused of accusing another companion of adultery and so forth. And we all know the ayah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَالَّذِينَ يَرْمُونَ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَأْتُوا بِأَرْبَعَةِ شُهَدَاء. Those who accuse others of adultery and they don't bring forth witnesses, then reject their witnessing afterwards. And that's what Umar radiallahu anhu did in his time. So Abu Bakr, not Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, not the great companion Abu Bakr, but Abu Bakr, the companion, he was not accepted in courts of the time. And that is, according to a Bukhari and Muslim, is a criteria that does not make him authentic for such narration. He narrated it also in a very political environment in which Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, was on the camel leading the battle during the 30 how many years after the Prophet ﷺ, when they had the battle of the camel, It was called like that because Aisha was actually leading one of the sides, the two sides that fought at that time. So Abu Bakr was against her politically. So he said, I heard the Prophet ﷺ said 20 years ago, ما أفلح قوم ولوا أمرهم. People who appoint a woman leader will never be successful. And then this, in my opinion, misnarration, and it's not just my opinion, a number of scholars, not a very popular opinion, the majority, again talking about minority and majority, the majority of scholars authenticated the hadith, but the hadith is a misnarration, as simple as that. Some other scholars said no, the hadith was about the queen of Persia at that time, and how the Persian kings and princes killed each other off until there was only a 17-year-old girl who became the queen of Persia, and the Prophet said they will never be successful because under the leadership of that girl, after killing off all the males, the cousins fighting and killing each other, familiar scene still, and so forth. So that's basically what the hadith was about, according to other narrations. Now, the misnarration in which Aisha radiallahu anha was saying, according to, again, a couple Bukhari narrators, that she married the Prophet ﷺ at the age of 6, and then they consummated the marriage at the age of 9. And that is a narration that contradicts, first of all, with the principles of the Quran about marriage and so on, and love and mercy. And how can the Quranic instructions and talk about marriage be fulfilled with a 6 or 9-year-old or a kid, really? And it contradicts with the Bukhari collection himself in a number of narrations. Aisha, in the same book, is saying that she witnessed the migration of Abyssinia, which was apparently 2 years before she was born, according to the 6 or 9-year-old. And therefore she was supposed to be, and she was a little girl, she said. She was a little girl, and her father wanted to migrate to Abyssinia, which is the year 4 of the message, which is 9 years before marrying him, according to this narration, at the age of 6. And in another narration, she participated in the Battle of Uhud, which was the next year of her marriage to the Prophet ﷺ. And you can't really say that she participated in the battle at the age of 7 or 10 or any of that. That doesn't make any sense. And the other narration, that she was engaged to a young man from Quraysh before she married the Prophet ﷺ, and how her father argued with Abu Bakr, her father, and then they broke the engagement. All of this doesn't happen to a 5 or 6-year-old. And the other narration, that she embraced Islam with her father, and that was in the year 1 of Islam, and she was a young girl, which was narrated by Muhammad ibn Ishaq, not in the authentic Bukhari and Muslim collection, but other authentic collections. We can discuss that scholarly if you wish. And many other reasons that contradict with that narration. That is a misnarration that was narrated by a follower of the companions by the name Hisham ibn Urwa. And Hisham ibn Urwa, according to the Bukhari criteria, is not authentic, because he had a relation with the king of the time. He worked really, or borrowed money, or whatever it is, from the sultan of the time. And that is, according to Bukhari, a criteria that disauthenticate him. But the majority of scholars accepted his narration, and now it is part of the fiqh, that we could have a girl who's 9 who gets married, and it's a total disaster. In our time as well, not just in the previous times, we see so many cases of disasters, and people refer to that hadith that contradicts with a dozen other evidences in the same collections sometimes, but it is a misnarration. Why? Because people would like to make black and white distinctions for political reasons. I would like to talk a little bit about politics and scholarship. I could go on about that for a couple hours, but basically, politicians in tyrannical systems and scholarships and scholars of Islam, they have a very intricate and very interesting relationship. Tyrants, since the fall of the Khilafah, fall of the succession of the Prophet ﷺ, and the founding of the empire, the Umayyad Empire, and then eventually the Abbasid Empire, the empires that came, the kingdoms, the emperors who ruled Muslims, versus the Khulafa, or the successors, who were servants for the people. The other guys were kings and emperors and living in castles of gold and this kind of thing. Before that, Umar radiallahu anhu or Uthman or Ali, they were just eating from the government. They were not accumulating any wealth. But when the tribe of Umayyah took over, they decided to suppress the fuqaha, to suppress some of the ulama who wanted to say different things. And women took a part of this in suppression. Why would a politician in today's world, for example, be interested in the suppression of women? I mean, when you do not allow women to drive, for example, then you have half of the society locked at home. That is a much easier country to manage rather than a country where women go back and forth. And yes, are these systems that fragile? Yes, they are. Those who come from that part of the world would tell you that. And therefore, for them, it is very advantageous to lock up part of the society. Half of it would be great at home, and the other half, I mean, they deal with that. It is very advantageous for them to keep the hegemony of men over women in an unfair way in the family law, because that means politics in the bigger sense. When women have the rights in the family law, then the structure that is built around power, which is mostly men, vicious guys, mafia-style kind of tyrants who rule the Muslim majority countries at large, that mafia doesn't have an interest in promoting the issues of women in terms of family law. I was part of debates with people who were involved in the legislation, since I work in the jurisprudence, in the family law in Egypt and back in Qatar and in a few other Arab countries. And from first account, there is a pressure on the legislators who would like to give women some family rights, as it is in Islam. There is a political pressure. There is a red light at the end for reform in the area of family law from the leadership of these countries, because they are not interested in that. This is not something that they would like to do. To liberate part of the society means that perhaps some other parts of the society will think of liberation, perhaps in a political or economic sense. And most of these countries are still under colonization in a new form and so forth. So they are not in a position to accommodate any liberating force. Female scholarship is another point I would like to make in the time allowed. It is very important that we have Sharia scholars who are female. And yes, we do have. They don't make it through the votes of the councils, the fatwa councils. I'm a member of a few of these councils in different countries. And recently, I am noticing more and more every time there are some names of female scholars who are nominated to be added to these fatwa councils. They are voted out. I can tell you that without too much details, but I see a growing voice of wanting to include women's scholarship in the fatwa councils. The traditional ones, I mean. And it is very important that we support female scholarship, because female scholarship is an integral part of Islamic scholarship. And the Islamic scholarship without females is not doing very well, and will not do well until the female voice comes back to scholarship. I know that from history. I studied history very well, hadith and so forth. And without the hadith narrators who were women, we would not have a hadith science that we have today. In fact, Imam al-Dhahabi, one of the great scholars of hadith, said, so many men lied about the Prophet ﷺ, but in our book of the liars about the Prophet, we do not have a single woman who lied about the Prophet ﷺ in our history of narrators. And we have hundreds of thousands of men. And all of the women, like when you see a woman chain, then it's a correct chain of narrators, because women don't lie about the Prophet ﷺ. You see here the politics and the culture and how it shapes scholarship. It's very important that we bring back women scholars to the Islamic scholarship. And I agree totally with my sister. Yes, we could find a fiqhi opinion to give women a masjid that is all women, all female masjid. Yes, even including Jum'ah. If they pray 4 rak'ahs of Dhuhr instead of 2 rak'ahs of Jum'ah, then they are correct according to every scholar in our history. There is no, it's not haram, but it is not right for our community. And not everything that is allowed in the Sharia is appropriate to do. And this is the case of women mosques. I support them as a kind of note of objection to what is happening in the real mosque. But I believe that women have to come back to the mosque and have to take the role in the mosque. And I think that this is a condition for women to take more leadership roles in our society, in our community and in Muslim societies in general. The model of the prophetic mosque doesn't exist anywhere, and I think it's very important to bring back the prophetic model. Because when women were in the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ participating in everything that's happening in the community, they were also in the market, leading the market. They were also in the battlefield, fighting if they can, and doing relief work when they can, and so forth. They were part of the life of Muslims, of this growing community that the Prophet ﷺ founded in Medina. Khadija is a fantastic example, Aisha, etc. Time wouldn't allow to get into the great women who shaped Islam for us. The Islam that we understand today was shaped by this. Allah said in the Quran, وَاذْكُرْنَا مَا يُتْلَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. Allah is telling them to narrate in the Quran. It's telling them, narrate what you see of the wisdom of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now we have fiqh, or some fuqaha, who tell us that a woman's voice is awra, and the Quran is telling them to narrate. How can they narrate if they cannot speak? And this is also part of this political problems that we have. In this part of the world, politics suffers from a lot of injustices. I'm not unaware of that, but I think there is room for Muslim women in America to contribute to that movement of Muslim women around the world. They have space to say what they can and to contribute, and they should have the full support of scholars, the true scholars of Islam, who do not care about the ambitions of the tyrants out there, west or east, but care only about the truth and are willing to support it with whatever price that they should pay for supporting the truth. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect you and to guide you. Again, I'm honored, and inshallah, being a minority here is an honor. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.